The wind on the moon of Kara Station never really stopped. It just changed its mood, sometimes soft, sometimes angry enough to shake the metal walls of the outpost. Daniel Hale had learned to sleep through most of it, but tonight was different. Tonight the wind screamed. He sat up in his narrow bunk and checked the wall panel. The numbers glowed red. A geothermal storm was rolling in from the eastern ridge, faster than any storm the weather drones had predicted. Daniel rubbed his eyes and pulled on his jacket. As the outpost's maintenance engineer, storms were his problem whether he liked it or not. He was the only human awake. Captain Ruth Calder was resting after a double shift, and Dr. Owen Reyes was buried in research notes somewhere in the lab wing. That left Daniel alone with the storm, and alone with a responsibility he had never asked for. The dragon nesting ground sat just beyond the outpost's outer fence, a shallow rocky basin where the adult dragons had laid their eggs weeks ago. It was sacred ground, off limits to humans except in emergencies. Tonight counted as an emergency. The adult dragons, led by their elder Illyra, were away on a traditional hunt that happened only once a season. It was terrible timing, but nature did not care about timing. Daniel checked the monitors again. The temperature near the nesting basin was dropping fast, faster than the eggs could survive without their mother's body heat. If nothing was done, the whole clutch would freeze before morning. He knew the treaty rules. Humans were not supposed to touch dragon eggs, ever, under any circumstance. But he also knew that if he did nothing, 6 unborn dragons would die tonight, and the fragile peace between humans and dragons would probably die with them. Blame would fall on the outpost no matter what. Daniel grabbed a portable heater unit, insulation blankets, and a flashlight, and ran out into the storm. The wind slammed into him instantly, sharp and cold, carrying dust that stung his eyes. He pushed forward anyway, following the fence line toward the basin. When he reached the nesting ground, his flashlight beam landed on 6 large eggs, pale gray and covered in fine cracks from the cold. They were arranged in a loose circle, half buried in soft volcanic sand that was usually warm but now felt icy under his boots. Daniel did not think, he just acted. He set up the heater unit at the center of the circle and began wrapping the blankets around the eggs one by one, working fast, his fingers going numb in the wind. When the blankets ran out, he did something he never planned to do. He lay down in the middle of the circle, curling his body around as many eggs as he could reach, using his own warmth as one more layer of protection. The storm raged for hours. Daniel lost track of time, focused only on keeping still, keeping warm, keeping the eggs alive. At some point, exhaustion pulled him into a strange half-sleep, his arms still wrapped around the nearest egg. He woke to a soft cracking sound. The egg closest to his chest was moving. A thin crack spread across its shell, then another. Daniel sat up slowly, watching as a small clawed foot pushed through the shell, followed by a wet, trembling head with tiny horns. The hatchling blinked large golden eyes and looked directly at him. One by one, the other eggs began to crack too. Within the hour, 6 small dragons had broken free of their shells, shaking off bits of shell and sand, each one turning to look at the same figure kneeling in the center of the nest. Daniel. He did not know the science behind it. Not yet. But he could feel something happening, something instinctive and powerful. The hatchlings pressed close against him, chirping in high, thin voices, their small bodies still cold from the storm. Without thinking, he wrapped the blankets around them instead of himself now, letting the heater warm the little circle they had formed together. By the time the storm passed and the gray light of morning crept over the ridge, Daniel was sitting in the center of a nest built from blankets and scrap metal. 6 dragon hatchlings curled against him, sound asleep. That was how Counselor Illyra found them. She landed at the edge of the basin with a heavy thud, her enormous frame casting a long shadow over the nest. 2 other adult dragons landed behind her. For a long moment, nobody moved. Illyra's golden eyes studied the scene, the broken shells, the humans sitting in the middle of her clutch, and the hatchlings stirring awake at the sound of her arrival. The hatchlings did not run to her. Instead, they turned toward Daniel, chirping anxiously, pressing closer to him as if he were the one who could protect them from this new, massive presence. Illyra's low growl rumbled through the basin, but it was not quite anger. It was something closer to shock. Daniel raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm, his heart pounding. He had saved the eggs. He had not meant for anything else to happen. But looking down at the 6 small dragons clinging to his sides, he understood, with a growing sense of dread and wonder, that something had happened anyway. Something that could not be undone. The bond had already formed. News traveled fast at a small outpost, even without anyone meaning to spread it. By the time Captain Ruth Calder reached the nesting basin, half the station staff were already standing at the fence, staring at the strange sight inside. Ruth pushed through the small crowd, her boots crunching on the cold sand. She stopped when she saw Daniel sitting in the middle of the basin, 6 dragon hatchlings pressed against him, and 3 full-grown dragons standing just a few steps away, watching in tense silence. "Somebody explain this to me," Ruth said quietly, mostly to herself. Dr. Owen Reyes arrived a moment later, out of breath, his tablet already in hand. He had spent the last 2 years studying dragon biology from a respectful distance, mostly through recordings and secondhand reports. He had never expected to see anything like this in person. "It's imprinting," Owen said, staring at the scene. "Has to be. I've read about it in the old survey logs, but I thought it only happened between hatchlings and their birth mother." "It happened with him," Ruth said, nodding toward Daniel. "It happened with him," Owen agreed. Counselor Illyra stepped forward, her claws digging small furrows into the sand. Her voice, when she spoke, came out low and rough, shaped carefully around human words she rarely bothered to use. "This should not be possible." "I didn't try to make it happen," Daniel said, still sitting carefully still so he would not startle the hatchlings clinging to his sides. "The storm was going to kill them. I just tried to keep them warm." "And in doing so," Illyra said, "you have become their first bond. Their protector, their kin." The word kin seemed to hang heavy in the cold morning air. Ruth exchanged a look with Owen. Neither of them fully understood what that meant yet, but the tone of Illyra's voice made it clear it was not something dragons took lightly. Over the next several days, the full weight of the situation became clear. Owen studied the hatchlings carefully, always keeping a respectful distance, taking notes on their behavior. What he found only confirmed what Illyra had already said. The 6 young dragons would not willingly leave Daniel's side. When he left for even a short walk to another building, they became distressed, calling out in high-pitched cries until he returned. When Owen tried gently guiding one of the hatchlings toward the other dragons, it dug its claws into the ground and refused to move, crying louder with each attempt. "This isn't simple habit," Owen told Ruth and Illyra during a tense meeting in the station's main hall. "Their heart rates spike when he's out of sight. Their stress hormones rise fast. If we separate them from him now, especially the smaller ones, it could cause real harm. Maybe even be fatal for the weakest of the clutch." Illyra's tail swept slowly across the floor, a sign of deep unease. "Among my people, the bond of first protection is sacred. It cannot be broken by force without breaking the hatchling's spirit along with it." "So what do we do?" Ruth asked. "We can't just let 6 growing dragons live inside a human research outpost. And we can't ask Daniel to just disappear either. That's not fair to him or to them." Daniel, standing near the back of the room where the hatchlings waited outside the door, spoke up carefully. "I never asked for this, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. If they need me right now, I'll stay with them. We can figure out the rest as we go." Illyra studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing something invisible. "You saved them during the storm without hesitation. That much I have seen with my own eyes. But saving a life once is not the same as raising it. Are you prepared for what that truly means, human?" Daniel did not have an answer ready, not really. He was an engineer, not a caretaker, and certainly not a parent to 6 dragons who could one day grow larger than the buildings around them. But he thought about the small, trembling hatchling that had been the first to hatch that stormy night, the one that had pressed its head against his chest and refused to let go. He thought about all 6 of them, waiting just outside the door right now because he had walked away for even a few minutes. "I don't know everything this means," Daniel admitted, "but I'm not going to walk away from them now." The meeting ended without a full agreement, but with an uneasy truce. The hatchlings would remain near Daniel, under close watch from both human researchers and dragon elders, while both sides tried to understand exactly what had happened and what it meant for the fragile peace between their 2 peoples. Word of the bond spread quickly beyond the outpost, carried by supply ships and long-range transmissions. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a dangerous mistake. Whatever it truly was, one thing became certain in the days that followed. The relationship between humans and dragons on this remote moon had changed forever, and it had changed because of one ordinary man who simply refused to let 6 eggs freeze in the dark. Behind the station's main hall, the 6 hatchlings waited patiently by the door, eyes fixed on it, waiting for it to open and for Daniel to walk back through. A week after the storm, Daniel woke up to the sound of scraping metal outside his habitat pod. He rubbed his eyes, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside expecting to find a maintenance problem. Instead, he found something far stranger. The 6 hatchlings, now steadier on their feet and growing fast, were dragging pieces of scrap metal across the ground toward his pod. One of them, the boldest of the clutch, had managed to pry loose a length of old piping from a supply shed and was hauling it along with clear determination, its small claws scraping the dirt. "What are you all doing?" Daniel asked, though he knew they could not answer him in words. The hatchlings ignored the question and kept working. Over the next hour, Daniel watched in amazement as they gathered stones, bits of insulation foam, broken panels, and anything else they could carry, stacking it all in a rough circle around the base of his habitat pod. It was clumsy and uneven, more like a pile than a structure, but the intention behind it was unmistakable. Dr. Owen Reyes arrived just in time to see the smallest hatchling, the run of the clutch, struggling to push a flat stone into place near the edge of the growing pile. Owen crouched down, watching closely, careful not to interfere. "They're nesting," Owen said quietly, almost to himself. "This is nest-building behavior. But it's early. Way too early for their age." "Is that bad?" Daniel asked. "Not bad exactly. Just unusual." Owen tapped notes into his tablet as he spoke. In the wild, hatchlings this young would stay inside their mother's nest for protection. They wouldn't normally start building their own structure this soon, and definitely not around something that isn't a natural dragon nesting site. Daniel looked down at the growing pile of scrap and stones circling his pod. "They're building it around me." "Yes," Owen said slowly, lowering his tablet. "I think they are." By midday, Counselor Illyra arrived to check on the hatchlings, as she now did every day. She stopped at the edge of the human housing area and stared at the half-finished structure surrounding Daniel's pod. Her wings folded slowly against her sides, and for a long moment, she said nothing at all. "This is the beginning of a den," Illyra finally said. "Among my people, hatchlings build their first shelter around whoever they consider their protector. It is one of the deepest instincts we carry, formed before conscious thought." "So this is normal?" Daniel asked. "It is normal in its nature," Illyra said. "It is not normal in its target." She studied the human habitat pod with clear discomfort. In all recorded history, a den has never been built around anyone but another dragon. Despite her unease, Illyra did not try to stop the hatchlings. Instead, over the following days, she began quietly guiding their efforts, showing them, in her own way, how to properly stack stones for strength, how to weave dried plant fiber from the ridge into insulation, how to shape a den that would actually hold up against the moon's harsh winds. It was clear she still did not fully approve of the situation, but she was not willing to let the hatchlings build something unsafe either. Daniel found himself learning alongside them. In the evenings, after his regular maintenance duties were done, he sat with Illyra as she explained basic dragon customs, the meaning behind certain postures, the difference between a warning growl and a curious one, the proper way to acknowledge an elder dragon without appearing weak or overly submissive. It was slow, awkward progress, but it was progress. The peace was tested one evening when the runt, the smallest and weakest hatchling, refused to eat and grew sluggish, its usually bright eyes dull and half-closed. Daniel noticed first, since the little dragon had taken to sleeping curled against his leg most nights. "Something's wrong with her," Daniel said, carrying the small dragon carefully to where Owen and Illyra were standing near the den. Owen ran a quick scan with his handheld device while Illyra examined the hatchling with careful, practiced movements, gently pressing along its sides and checking its breathing. "She is too cold," Illyra said. "Her body has not yet learned to hold its own heat properly. This happens sometimes with the smallest of a clutch." "What do we do?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with worry. "We warm her, together," Illyra said, And for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice, no distance between them. Hold her against your chest. Your body worked once to save them all. It will work again. Daniel sat down inside the half-built den, cradling the small dragon against him, while Illyra curled her long body around them both, sharing her own warmth as an extra layer of protection. Owen monitored the readings quietly, occasionally adjusting a portable heater nearby. Through the night, the three of them, human, dragon elder, and struggling hatchling, stayed close together, working as one to keep the smallest member of the clutch alive. By early morning, the little dragon's breathing had steadied, and her eyes opened bright and clear once more. Illyra looked at Daniel across the sleeping hatchling, something shifting in her expression, something that had not been there before. It was not full trust yet, but it was the beginning of respect. Perhaps, Illyra said quietly, this bond is not the mistake I believed it to be. Around them, the den continued to rise, stone by stone, built by small clawed hands around the one human who had refused to let any of them go. The message arrived on a routine supply ship, buried among cargo manifests and maintenance requests. Captain Ruth Calder almost missed it entirely, until the encrypted flag caught her attention during her morning review. She read it twice before calling Daniel and Owen into her office. We have a problem, Ruth said, turning her monitor so they could see the decoded message. Someone outside the station has heard about the hatchlings. About the bond. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Who? A group calling themselves free traders, Ruth said, though her tone made it clear she did not believe the polite name for a second. Smugglers. They deal in rare biological material across half a dozen systems. Someone tipped them off about a clutch of young dragons living without adult protection most of the day. Owen frowned, pulling up a report on his own tablet. That's not accurate, though. The adults check on them constantly. It doesn't matter if it's accurate, Ruth said. It matters what these people believe and what they're willing to risk to get their hands on live dragon hatchlings. Young dragon scales, claws, even blood, sell for enormous amounts on certain black markets. A live hatchling would be worth even more. Daniel felt a cold, sharp anger rise in his chest, sudden and unfamiliar in its intensity. He thought of the runt curled against his side most nights, of the bold one dragging pipes across the yard, of all 6 small dragons who trusted him completely. We have to warn Illyra, Daniel said. We will, Ruth said. But we also need a plan. If these traders are serious, they'll wait for a moment when the adult dragons are away, like during their hunting rituals. That's exactly the kind of opening they'd be looking for. That evening, Illyra listened to the warning with a stillness that Daniel had come to recognize as barely controlled fury. Her claws dug deep grooves into the ground as she spoke. There are those among my own kind as well, Illyra admitted, who dislike this bond between the hatchlings and your kind. Some believe it weakens us, ties us too closely to humans. I do not believe they would go so far as to aid outsiders in stealing our young, but I cannot promise it either. So we might be dealing with more than just outside smugglers, Owen said quietly. Perhaps, Illyra said. Trust is a fragile thing, human. It grows slowly and breaks easily. Over the following days, tension settled over the outpost like a heavy fog. Extra security measures were added around the human housing area and the den the hatchlings had built. Ruth arranged for additional supplies, including basic defensive equipment, though the outpost had never been designed with combat in mind. It was a research station, not a fortress. Despite the growing danger, life around the den continued in its strange new rhythm. The hatchlings had grown noticeably in just a few weeks, their small horns lengthening, their wings developing faint ridges that hinted at future flight. They still could not fly, not yet, but they were faster now, stronger, and increasingly aware of the world around them. Daniel noticed something else too, something that both amazed and unsettled him. The hatchlings had begun acting together in ways that seemed too coordinated for young animals following pure instinct. When a supply drone flew too close to the den one afternoon, all 6 hatchlings turned toward it at once, positioning themselves in a rough defensive circle around the den entrance, low growls rumbling from throats too young to have learned such sounds on purpose. They're protecting the den, Owen said, watching the display with fascination. Together, in sync. They're protecting him, Illyra corrected, nodding toward Daniel. The den simply happens to be where he lives. That night, Daniel sat outside the den, watching the 6 hatchlings settle down to sleep in their usual overlapping pile near his feet. He thought about the smugglers somewhere out there, drawn by rumors of 6 vulnerable young dragons ripe for the taking. He thought about how wrong that assumption already was. Ruth found him there, wrapped in a thick jacket against the cold night air, going over defense plans on a portable screen. "You should get some rest," she said, sitting down beside him. "I keep thinking about what happens if they come while Illyra and the others are away," Daniel said. "The hatchlings would fight. I know they would, but they're still so young." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Then we make sure they're not alone when it happens. Whatever plan these traitors have, we prepare for it together. Humans, dragons, all of us." Daniel looked over at her, surprised by the shift in her tone. A few weeks ago, Ruth had been deeply uncertain about the entire situation, worried about treaty violations and diplomatic fallout. Now, watching the hatchlings sleep peacefully despite the danger closing in around them, something in her had clearly changed too. "You really believe that?" Daniel asked. "Humans and dragons standing together?" "I believe," Ruth said slowly, "that whatever is happening here, between you and them, it's bigger than old treaties and cautious distance. Maybe it's time the rest of us caught up." Above them, the moon's twin rings glittered faintly in the dark sky, calm and distant, unaware of the storm of a different kind now gathering on the horizon. Somewhere out in the void, a smuggler ship was already charting its course toward Kara Station, drawn by greed and rumor, with no idea what truly waited for them below. The hatchlings stirred briefly in their sleep, shifting closer around Daniel's feet, as if some deep instinct already sensed the danger to come. The attack came on the one night everyone had feared it would. Illyra and most of the adult dragons had left at dusk for a mandatory gathering at the far side of the ridge, a seasonal meeting between dragon clans that could not be postponed or skipped without serious consequence. Only 2 young adult dragons remained behind to watch over the nesting grounds, a smaller guard than usual, but the best the elders had been able to arrange on short notice. Daniel had a bad feeling all evening. He sat near the den long after the hatchlings had settled down to sleep, watching the dark ridge line where Illyra and the others had disappeared hours earlier. Ruth had doubled the security patrols, but the outpost's defenses were still thin, built for research, not war. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight, a low hum in the sky that did not belong to any station equipment. Daniel was on his feet instantly, adrenaline flooding through him before his mind had even fully processed the sound. The hatchlings woke almost at the same moment, their heads snapping up, low growls rising from 6 small throats in perfect, eerie unison. "Ruth," Daniel shouted into his comm unit. "Something's coming in from the east ridge, low altitude, no station clearance." "I see it." Ruth's voice came back, tight and alert. "Unregistered craft. That's them. Everyone to defensive positions, now." The smuggler ship dropped low over the outpost's outer fence, and Daniel watched in horror as 3 smaller drop pods detached from its underside, falling fast toward the ground near the den. They hit hard, kicking up dust and debris, and armored figures spilled out almost immediately, moving with the practiced speed of people who had done this before. "Get behind me," Daniel said to the hatchlings, though he barely had time to think before they were already moving. The 6 young dragons did not run to hide. Instead, they spread out instinctively, forming a rough half-circle in front of the den entrance, small bodies tense and ready despite their size, growls rising into sharp, defiant snarls. The first smuggler raised a capture net launcher, aiming for the nearest hatchling. Daniel moved without thinking, grabbing a length of pipe from beside the den and swinging it hard into the man's arm just as he fired. The net shot wide, tangling harmlessly in the dirt instead of around its intended target. Chaos erupted across the yard. Owen arrived moments later with a portable stun device, firing it at another smuggler trying to flank around the den from the side. Ruth's security team engaged the remaining raiders near the outer fence, exchanging fire with the 2 young adult dragons who had stayed behind. Their wings flared wide as they dove and struck at the intruders from above. Through it all, the hatchlings fought with a coordination that startled even Daniel. The bold one charged low and fast, sinking small but sharp claws into a smuggler's leg, forcing him back. Two others worked together, one distracting a raider from the front while the other struck from behind, small teeth and claws finding gaps in the armor. It was not the fighting of trained warriors, but it was far more than simple animal panic. It was the fierce, desperate defense of a family protecting its home. Daniel fought alongside them, driven by a fear sharper than anything he had ever felt, not for himself, but for the 6 small lives he had sworn, without ever fully realizing it, to protect. He took a hard blow to the shoulder from a smuggler's weapon, staggering but refusing to fall, placing himself directly between the attacker and the smallest hatchling, who had frozen in fear near the den entrance. "Not her," Daniel said through gritted teeth, raising the pipe again despite the pain radiating down his arm. "You don't touch her." The smuggler hesitated, just for a moment, clearly unprepared for the sheer intensity in the human's eyes. That hesitation was enough. A sudden gust of wind and a deafening roar announced Illyra's return, along with a dozen other adult dragons who had turned back the moment the hatchlings' distress calls reached them across the ridge, carried by the same deep bond that had first alarmed the dragon elders weeks ago. Illyra landed hard between Daniel and the remaining smugglers, her massive form casting a shadow that swallowed the moonlight. Her roar shook the ground, and within moments, the remaining raiders were scrambling back toward their drop pods, quickly realizing they were now outmatched many times over. The battle ended almost as quickly as it began, the smuggler ship lifting off in a panicked retreat, leaving behind 2 captured raiders and a badly damaged drop pod as the only evidence of the attempted raid. In the sudden quiet that followed, Daniel sank down onto the dirt beside the den, his shoulder throbbing, his hands shaking from adrenaline. The hatchlings immediately swarmed around him, checking him over with worried chirps, pressing close against his sides as if to make sure he was truly unharmed. Illyra approached slowly, her golden eyes moving from the injured human to the 6 hatchlings surrounding him protectively. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. "You placed yourself between them and danger without hesitation," Illyra finally said. "Even injured, you did not step aside." "They're mine to protect," Daniel said simply, wincing as Owen knelt beside him to check the wound on his shoulder. "I wasn't going to just watch." Illyra lowered her head slightly, an unmistakable gesture of respect among her kind. "Then you have proven, beyond any doubt, what this bond truly means." Around them, the other adult dragons began settling in around the den as well, no longer keeping their usual distance from the human structures. For the first time since the storm that had started it all, humans and dragons stood together, not as cautious neighbors bound by treaty, but as something closer to family, forged in fire and fear and fierce, shared protection. 3 weeks after the raid, representatives from both the Human Colonial Authority and the Dragon Clan Council arrived at Kara Station for a meeting that had been delayed far too many times already. Daniel had not expected to be part of it, but Captain Ruth Calder insisted he sit at the table alongside her, Owen, and Counselor Illyra. "You're the reason we're even having this conversation," Ruth told him that morning, adjusting the collar of her formal uniform. "It only makes sense you're part of it." The meeting hall had been hastily prepared, a large open room usually used for supply storage, now cleared out and fitted with enough space for both human officials and several full-grown dragons to sit comfortably. Daniel found the arrangement strange, but somehow fitting, a room built for cargo now holding the weight of history instead. The human representative, a stern woman named Director Halden, opened the meeting with careful, formal language, reviewing the old treaty terms that had governed human and dragon relations for years, terms built entirely on distance and caution. Illyra, seated at the head of the dragon delegation, listened with visible patience, though her tail flicked occasionally in a way Daniel had learned meant quiet impatience. "With respect," Illyra finally said, once the director paused. "The events of these past weeks have shown that distance is no longer the foundation this relationship should rest upon." Director Halden frowned slightly. The imprinting incident was unprecedented and, frankly, concerning. 6 dragon hatchlings bonding permanently to a single human engineer was never part of any agreement between our peoples. "No," Illyra agreed. "It was not planned by anyone. It was instinct and fate and one man's refusal to let innocent lives freeze in a storm." She turned her golden eyes toward Daniel. And it has proven, beyond doubt, that trust between our two peoples is possible, not through careful treaties alone, but through shared sacrifice and shared protection. The room fell quiet for a moment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention and used to being the center of such a serious discussion. During the raid, Owen spoke up, breaking the silence. Human and dragon defenders fought side by side for the first time in recorded history, not out of treaty obligation, but because they were protecting the same thing, the same family. Director Halden studied the reports laid out before her, the same reports Ruth had compiled in the days following the attack. Slowly, her expression shifted from cautious skepticism to something closer to genuine consideration. "You're suggesting," Halden said carefully, "that we use this bond as a foundation for closer cooperation. Not just tolerance, but true partnership." "I am suggesting," Illyra said, "that it already exists. The only question is whether our governments choose to recognize what has already happened or continue pretending distance still serves either of our peoples." The negotiations that followed stretched across several more days, filled with careful language, compromise, and long overdue conversations between human and dragon leaders who had spent years keeping each other at arm's length. Slowly, a new agreement began to take shape, one built not on rigid separation, but on structured cooperation, shared research, and mutual protection. Through it all, Daniel spent his free hours back at the den, now a much larger and sturdier structure built with proper dragon craftsmanship, guided by Illyra herself, blended seamlessly with pieces of human technology. Daniel had insisted on including better insulation, small solar panels, reinforced supports against the moon's harsh storms. The hatchlings had grown considerably in the weeks since the raid, their wings now strong enough for short, clumsy flights around the den, their horns longer, their voices deeper. Yet despite their growth, they still gathered close around Daniel each evening, curling together in the same overlapping pile they had formed since their very first night out of the shell. On the final day of negotiations, Illyra approached Daniel outside the den, where he sat repairing a loose panel with the runt watching curiously beside him, no longer weak or sickly, but strong and alert, her golden eyes bright with health. "The council has agreed," Illyra said. "You will be formally recognized as kin to this clutch, the first human ever granted such a place among my people." Daniel set down his tools, looking up at her, still faintly amazed after everything that had happened. "I never expected any of this, you know. I just didn't want them to freeze that night." "I know," Illyra said, something warm settling into her usually sharp gaze. "That is precisely why it matters so much. You did not seek power or glory or reward. You simply refused to let them die. That is the truest foundation any bond can be built upon." That evening, as the twin rings of the moon rose bright and clear overhead, Daniel sat inside the den, surrounded by all 6 young dragons, now nearly as tall as he was, their scales catching the pale light in soft shades of gray and gold. The bold one nudged playfully against his shoulder. The runt curled contentedly against his side, exactly as she had every night since that first storm. Beyond the den, the outpost had changed too, dragon and human structures now standing side by side, a new kind of settlement forming where suspicion had once ruled. Ruth and Owen worked closely with Illyra and the other elders now, laying the groundwork for a future neither species could have imagined just a few short months earlier. Daniel looked around at the strange, wonderful family that had built itself around him, one storm-born choice at a time. He had never set out to change the future between 2 entire species. He had only wanted to keep 6 frightened hatchlings warm through a long, dangerous night. Sometimes, he thought, watching the hatchlings settle down to sleep around him once more, that was exactly how the biggest changes in history began, not with grand plans, but with one small act of kindness, offered without hesitation, in the middle of a storm.